The Pokemon world has gods, monsters, and dimensional rifts, and somehow scientists just keep showing up to take notes on all of it. We're talking about people who looked at a living deity made of time itself and thought, fascinating, let me write that down. But some of these scientists didn't stop at observation, started building things, creating things. Things that probably should not exist. Mewtwo, type Null, Genesect, Porygon. These aren't wild Pokemon that wandered out of a forest. They were made, deliberately, in a lab, and the scientists behind them range from genuinely brilliant to completely unhinged, sometimes both at the same time, which is honestly the most dangerous combination. Please consider subscribing, as I just started this new channel, as my old channel was falsely demonetized. Anyways, start with Dr. Fuji. Most people know him as Mr. Fuji, the gentle old man in Lavender Town who takes care of orphan Pokemon. What the game doesn't hand you up front is that this same man founded the Cinnabar Island Laboratory. He was the one who started the Mewtwo project. His daughter Amber had died, and Fuji became obsessed with the idea of resurrection through cloning. Mewtwo wasn't a weapon first, it was grief. Team Rocket saw the project and funded it. They wanted a living weapon. Fuji wanted his daughter back. Neither of them got what they came for. What came out of that tank was Mewtwo. Genes spliced from Mew's DNA samples, power that exceeded the original, and absolutely no reason to trust humans. Mewtwo destroyed the facility. The scientists survived, but the lab was gone. Fuji eventually walked away from all of it and moved to Lavender Town. That experiment set the template for everything that followed. Brilliant idea, catastrophic execution, and a creation that immediately becomes its own problem. Then there's the Aether Foundation, which looked at the Mewtwo situation and apparently thought, we can do that, but worse. Their project was called Beast Killer. The goal was to create a Pokemon that could fight Ultra Beasts, creatures from other dimensions that were tearing through reality. Reasonable problem. Unhinged solution. They combined cell cultures from every known Pokemon type into a single organism. All 18 types fused together. They called the result type Null. All three models they created rejected the Arc system and went completely berserk. The helmets were built specifically to suppress that. The project was declared a failure. They put the subjects into cryogenic stasis and moved on. One eventually broke free, destroyed its helmet, and became Silvally. The system worked, just not for them. Lusamine is Pokemon's take on the mad scientist archetype, except instead of chasing world domination, she's chasing her dead husband, and that distinction is what makes her one of the best written villains in the whole franchise. The second the Aether Foundation shows up in that early Sun and Moon trailer, you can just tell something's wrong. All that gleaming white We Protect Pokemon branding practically begging you not to trust it. And you shouldn't, not fully, even though most of the rank and file at Aether are just regular employees who have no idea what their boss is doing behind closed doors. It's really just her, one woman running the whole operation into the ground. Her design does a lot of quiet work too. Bright, elegant, the kind of look that reads as put together at a glance, but her hair covers half her face like she's hiding something, and the harsh black lines cutting through all that white fabric feel less like fashion and more like a warning label. The backstory is what pulls her out of generic villain territory. She had a husband, a normal family, and then he disappears during some kind of experiment. We find out much later he isn't dead. He got teleported somewhere else entirely with his memories wiped clean. But Lusamine doesn't know that, and not knowing breaks her. She becomes consumed with getting him back, and that obsession bleeds into an obsession with Ultra Beasts as a whole. These creatures from beyond reality that she thinks hold the answer. Somewhere in that spiral she stops being a mother. Lily and Gladion get controlled, criticized, verbally torn down whenever they don't fall in line, and eventually both of them just leave, but because staying near her had become unbearable. Then there's the lab. You stumble onto this hidden room, and it's genuinely one of the more disturbing things Pokemon has ever put in a mainline game. Frozen Pokemon everywhere, preserved mid-pose like museum pieces, and she calls the whole grim display her collection, her precious babies. Technically, they might still be alive in some sci-fi sense, but functionally. If she's just going to keep them iced forever, what's the actual difference between that and killing them? A few of the Pokemon in that room even come straight out of a bedtime story she used to read her own kids, which on paper sounds sentimental but in practice makes the whole scene worse, because now you're looking at a mother trying to freeze her old life in place, just using Pokemon as the medium instead of photographs. Eventually she goes after Cosmog, drains it to tear open a portal to Ultra Space, and by the time you catch up to her there, she's already lost the plot entirely. She fuses with Neolego and becomes this jelly-draped, crab-shaped horror show, her usual color palette curdling into something dark and wrong. Because Neolego doesn't just team up with a host, it amplifies whatever's already inside them. So what you're fighting isn't a monster exactly, it's Lusamine's grief and control issues given a body. She doesn't get an easy pass after you beat her either. The game doesn't wave away the neglect or the manipulation just because her motivations made emotional sense. But she does get a real moment with Lily at the end, and that's part of why the character lands. She's not shipped off like some villains who just vanish once their arc ends. She has to actually sit with what she did. And the part that lingers with me isn't even the final battle. It's the frozen Pokemon nobody ever mentions again. Did they get thawed out and released? Did they survive the process at all? The game never answers it, and that unanswered question is honestly scarier than anything that happens in the final fight. This is why Lucamine is one of the most psychotic Pokemon scientists / characters in the whole of the franchise, which puts her as one of the crazy scientists of Pokemon. Over in Unova, Team Plasma had a different approach. They found an ancient fossil Pokemon and decided it needed upgrades. That became Genesect. They rebuilt it with a metallic body and mounted a cannon on its back. N, the Team Plasma leader, canceled the project on ethical grounds. The scientists kept going anyway. That's a recurring theme with Pokemon science. Someone in charge says stop. The scientists do not stop. The creation escapes. Everyone acts surprised. Porygon is a different kind of creation entirely, just code. Programmers at Cinnabar Lab built a Pokemon entirely out of computer data. It was the first Pokemon made with modern technology rather than ancient science or genetic material. They even embedded copy protection into its code. Very practical. Porygon Z came later after an unauthorized upgrade patch was applied. Nobody officially sanctioned it. The result was a Pokemon that behaves erratically and phases through dimensions. Then there's Magearna, which puts everything into perspective. Someone built a functional robotic Pokemon with a soul heart mechanism over 500 years ago. It understands human speech. It was built as a gift for a princess. Medieval robotics, basically. Whoever made it left no name behind, which feels intentional. The professors sit on the other end of this spectrum. They're not building weapons or cloning gods. They're trying to understand what's already out there. Professor Magnolia's Dynamaxing research is the cautionary tale for that side. She brought the phenomenon public, which turned every gym into a monetized stadium. Towns like Spikemuth got left behind entirely. The culture that existed before the stadiums just got paved over. Good science, genuinely terrible downstream consequences. What makes these scientists so compelling is that they're all working in a world where the rules keep changing. New type discovered, new dimension found, new god wakes up. The craziest thing isn't any single experiment, it's that they keep going. Every disaster, every escaped creation, every destroyed lab, they just open a new notebook. Bill is the guy who built the Pokemon storage system. Millions of trainers use it daily. What gets buried is that he also accidentally fused himself with a Pokemon during a teleportation experiment. He walked it off, fixed the machine, separated himself, and kept going. That's the kind of casual relationship with Catastrophe that defines Pokemon science. Colress is a different breed entirely. He doesn't care about weapons or weapons programs. He wants to know the upper limit of what any Pokemon can become. He worked with Team Plasma, then walked away, then showed up in Alola studying Z-Power, then reappeared researching Mega Evolution. He follows the science wherever it goes, regardless of who's funding it. That makes him genuinely dangerous in a way the villains aren't. He has no agenda beyond understanding. And that means no line he won't cross if the data is interesting enough. Colress is so heartless and so psychotic that he created a machine which puts Pokemon against their trainer's control. It managed to control Ash's Pikachu, putting it under the machine's control. It managed to even control the legendary Pokemon Reshiram. This shows how powerful the machine he built actually was, and how heartless and immoral he really was. Pokemon really went all out with their story and their characters in black and white. Professor Kukui and Alola studied Pokemon moves specifically, how they work, why certain species can learn certain techniques, and what the physical mechanics actually are. He also founded the Alola Pokemon League. He tested moves on himself. Personally, that detail is in the games, and it is treated as completely normal, which says everything about the culture of Pokemon research. Professor Burnett studied ultra wormholes and the dimensional mechanics behind them. She was mapping the infrastructure of other dimensions before most people even accepted those dimensions existed. Her work and Kukui's eventually merged, personally and professionally. Two researchers whose fields were completely different ended up building the same regional institution together. The Alola League was a joint project. Professor Sonia and Galar gets underestimated because she came after Magnolia. But Sonia's research corrected the historical record. She proved the Darkest Day wasn't a legend. It was a documented event. She also identified that Zacian and Zamazenta were real, specific Pokemon tied to that event, not symbolic figures. She turned mythology into verifiable history. That's a different kind of science entirely. Grimer and Muck are another accidental creation the game slipped past you. They appeared in polluted waterways after industrial runoff was exposed to lunar radiation. Nobody planned that. Nobody stopped it either. Trubbish and Garbodor came from a chemical reaction between industrial waste and household garbage. A Pokemon literally formed from a landfill. Ditto's origin is never officially confirmed, but the leading theory is that it's a failed Mew clone. The physical similarity, the ability to transform, the distribution near old research sites. The evidence stacks up. The Pokemon world's relationship with accidental creation is like leaving a lab unlocked overnight and coming back to find something has moved the furniture. Nobody intended most of these things. They just happened. Blaine gets overlooked in all of this. The Cinnabar gym leader was also a researcher who worked directly on the Mewtwo project before walking away from it entirely. He left before the experiment concluded. That decision probably saved his life. He never talked about it publicly, he just started running a gym and pretending none of it happened. Team Flare and Kalos took a different angle on Mewtwo entirely. They didn't want to study it. They wanted to use it as a power source for a weapon designed to erase most of humanity. The creation becomes a means to something worse than the original experiment ever was. The Iron series in Paldea raises a question nobody in the games answers cleanly. If future scientists built robotic versions of ancient Pokemon, what were they trying to solve? Iron Crown was built to resemble Cobalion. Iron Boulder resembles Terrakion. Someone in that future deliberately reconstructed the Swords of Justice as weapons. The intent is written into the design. Sada and Turo lost themselves to their own research. Sada and Turo are honestly some of the best mad scientist characters Pokemon has ever done, mostly because the game never lets you meet them as a person, only as the wreckage they left behind. By the time Scarlet and Violet starts, whichever one is your version is already dead, and everything you learn about them comes secondhand through an AI wearing their face and carrying their memories. What makes them so unsettling is the sheer scale of what they were willing to do to chase one idea. They didn't just study paradox Pokemon or theorize about time travel. They got so obsessed with pulling creatures out of the past and future that they built literal Terra Crystal tech to make it happen. And when the project needed more hands, they didn't hire an assistant. They built a copy of their own mind instead. That's the detail that gives away exactly who they were as a person. Somewhere along the way, they decided nobody else, not even another human being, was as qualified to finish their work as another version of themselves. That's not humility. That's a god complex wearing a lab coat. And it gets worse once you learn about the Paradise Protection Protocol. This wasn't some accidental oversight. They specifically programmed a failsafe into the AI that would strip away its free will the second it tried to shut the time machine down. So even after death, even after the AI started developing its own thoughts and disagreeing with them, Sada or Turo made absolutely sure their will would override the AI's no matter what. That's not just obsessive, that's controlling in a way that outlives the person doing the controlling, which is genuinely one of the creepier things a Pokemon villain has ever done. Then there's Arven. His parent was so deep in their research that their own kid basically raised himself, closer to his Pokemon than to either parent. And by the time the story catches up to him, he's still working through that. The professor dies chasing their obsession, technically trying to save a legendary Pokemon at the very end. But one noble moment doesn't erase years of a kid growing up alone in a house with a scientist who cared more about ripping holes in time than being present. What really sells it is that you never get a clean villain speech or a mustache twirl moment. You just get the slow accumulation of evidence that this was someone who let their curiosity completely eat them alive, to the point where they'd sacrifice their family, their own humanity, and eventually their literal life just to see their theory through. Classic mad scientist arc, just filtered through a kid's video game and somehow hitting way harder than it has any right to. The cost is always personal, the creation always outlasts the creator, and the next scientist always opens the next notebook anyway, because the alternative is leaving the question unanswered. After everything, that's what the franchise is actually about. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, then please consider subscribing and go watch another video.